Good morning. What a week. I saw 6 movies this week. I'm exhausted. I'm supposed to see another one in about 2 hours, but I sent a text to the distributor. I said, I can't do it. I got too much to do and sorry. And so actually, she's having another screening on the 26th of November. Um, so I said, I'll go to that. So anyhow, I got 3 films to talk about today. A real mixed bag. The first one is called Guilt by Design, as opposed to Guilty by Design. I don't know why it's Guilt by Design. It's a local film, Hong Kong film starring Nick Chung, Jung Ka Fai, and I haven't, because I've seen so many films, I haven't even written up what I want to say. So this is all off the top of my head. Uh, Nick plays a world-renowned um, hypnotherapist. He's like the best there is, and he's called to serve on a jury on a trial of a young woman, an heiress who's charged with killing. I believe, if I can remember correctly, I think she was charged with killing her uncle under rather suspicious circumstances. And just as the trial is about to start, or the trial has started, just as the jury is about to become sequestered, just as the jury is about to become sequestered, he gets a phone call from somebody who tells him that his daughter has been kidnapped. And if he doesn't hypnotize the other jurors into voting that this woman should be guilty, something will happen to the daughter. All right, that's basically what the story is about. Now, what a piece of crap, okay? there is so much that's bad about this movie. To start with, somebody who can hypnotize another person using the timer of a microwave oven would probably never be selected for jury duty, for risk that there would be jury tampering going on. So, or or as a profession, as a medical professional, or as a hypnotherapist professional, he would try to excuse himself or recuse himself from jury duty. And of course, you can say, well, why didn't he do it once he was threatened with extortion? And of course, he couldn't at that point, according to the movie. But you would think ahead of time. You'd say, look, I have the potential to hypnotize anybody at any time, against their will, and perhaps you shouldn't put me on the jury. And that was like the first big problem with this film. It's real garbage, just garbage film. Um, and then, of course, in very typical Chinese or pro Beijing fashion, the savior, the hero of the film is the main character, the protagonist, brother-in-law, who just happened to be a former Chinese soldier, mainland Chinese soldier. So, he's the big hero of the film. So I just thought, it's pandering to the people up north. It's just a ridiculous, preposterous plot. Um, uh, really, really, and he was okay. Nick Chung was okay, but the acting was pretty weak. Nothing special. I liked the end. There was, the big scene at the end. There was some good CGI going on there. Okay, but we've seen it before. So, you know what? Guilt by Design. Really, look, I'm not a big fan of Hong Kong films, and I live in Hong Kong, and this one will not change my opinion of what I think of the majority of Hong Kong films. This one was really bad. Okay, Guilt by Design. That opened yesterday. All these films opened yesterday in Hong Kong. Next film I'm going to talk about is a Japanese film called No Longer Human. Japanese title is Ningen Shikaku Dazai Osamu to Sanni no Onetachi. Basically, No Longer Human, Dazai Osamu and his 3 women. And if it's a portrait of the very successful but short-lived author by the name of Dazai Osamu, who was very popular in Japan. He's still popular today. His work is still very popular today. But his masterpiece, so to speak, of the same name, No Longer Human, Ningen Shikaku, was published in 1948, and he took his life immediately afterwards. That's not a spoiler. You can Wikipedia it, and you'll see, read up about him. So this story, this film covers Dazai Osamu's life in the last pretty much. I'm trying to think, when does it start? It starts around 1941, goes up to 1948. So the last 7 years of his life. Now, if you're familiar with Dazai Osamu, you might be interested in this film. I will admit, I never heard of the guy. I don't really, except for Mishima, a couple of Japanese writers. I don't know my Japanese writers, so I didn't know him. But his book, Ningen Shikaku, is the second best-selling novel in Japan of all time, right after a book called Kokoro, which means heart, by Natsume Soseki. So he's very, very, even today, he's very, very popular inside Japan, or for people who do read 20th century Japanese literature. But as I said, I never knew who he was. So the story basically, as I said, it begins around 1941, which is around the time Japan entered the Pacific, or began the Pacific War. Or I guess the Pacific War is probably happening before 1941, but let's say America entered the Pacific War. Let's put it that way. And Dazai, who's played by Oguri Shun, he was in a film that came out, I think it was last year, which I wanted to see just for the title alone, but I missed it, called Let Me Eat Your Pancreas. I remember seeing the trailer for it, and I was thinking, oh my God, Let Me Eat Your Pancreas. I got to see this movie. But actually, I missed it. I don't remember why I missed it, but I missed it. But he was in that film. Now, Dazai was born Tsushima Shuji. And so Dazai Oshima was his pen name. By 1941, he had already received a fair amount of success with the publishing of a number of his novels and his short stories. He was married. Even it's not covered in the movie, but his life story was very sort of a fairly wealthy family that they. I don't know how they made all their money. How his father made all his money, but. Fairly wealthy family, and he had a very troubled life, right? From a young age, he tried to commit suicide a couple times. He married a prostitute, divorced her. I mean, he was really like a real rebel. But that's not covered in the movie. That's outside the movie. But by this point in the movie, he was already married to his second wife. She's former teacher Ishihara Michiko. But you know what? He doesn't think twice about beginning an open affair with another woman by the name of Ota Shizuko, who is his biggest fan. Now, using Ota's own diary, Dazai writes the book called Shayo, which means setting sun, and it's published to great acclaim in 1947. Now, he's a very heavy drinker and womanizer to boot, and he suffers from tuberculosis. And during no sooner does he write this book, then he meets another woman by the name of Yamazaki Tomi. She's a war widow. She was only married to her husband for about 10 days, and he died in the war. And he begins a relationship with her. And he leaves his wife, and they're now 3 young children for this third woman. And it's at this point that he begins to write his greatest novel, Ningen Shikaku, No Longer Human. And immediately after the novel's published, he and Yamazaki commit suicide. So as I said, it's not a spoiler here. All this is, you can read up about his life and you can find out. So that's pretty much what the story is about. But of course, it gets into much more detail than that. Now, this film is directed by Ninagawa Mika. She effectively recreates wartime and post-war Japan. She uses rich visuals, and her trademark, she's got a very trademark, colorful palette. And it's a visually very pretty film. But unfortunately, I'd say, unless you're familiar with Dazai, his work, his tumultuous life, there's very little here that will keep your curiosity piqued for 2 hours. I know mine wasn't. Now, writer Hayafune Kaiko, she tries to paint Dazai as a sympathetic character, but, in my opinion, the author comes across as an impudent Lothario. He is very much, interested in satisfying his own needs and wants and doesn't really care about anybody else's. It's hard to imagine how any woman could have found him attractive, but perhaps his writing was that good. They loved his brain rather than who he was as a person. So as I said, if you're already a fan of Dazai's work, this film will be of interest to you. Otherwise, give it a miss. Not interesting at all. And as I said, visually beautiful, but not very interesting. So that's called No Longer Human. It's played at a couple of Asian film festivals around the world, but fairly new and opened in Hong Kong yesterday. No Longer Human, Dazai Osamu and his three women. Finally, the big English language film that opened yesterday is Dr. Sleep, starring Ewan McGregor. Now, this is certainly, 2019 has certainly turned out to be the year of Stephen King at the cinema and on Netflix. We've had Pet Sematary, we had It Chapter 2, we had just recently, which I haven't seen yet, it was a Netflix movie called In the Tall Grass, and now we have Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to King's very successful book called The Shining. But actually, it's more of the sequel to director Stanley Kubrick's classic film adaptation from 1980, because Dr. Sleep pays great homage to that film. I don't know if you're aware that there is a fair amount of difference between the movie The Shining and the book The Shining, and to this day, Stephen King is not happy, about Kubrick's adaptation of his book. So this film sort of steers a middle ground. It couldn't veer, because Kubrick's film is so much in the public consciousness. He couldn't steer, the director, what's the director's name? I can't remember the director's name, but it's, what's his name? I can't remember his name offhand. Where is it? Mike Flanagan. He couldn't stray too far away from Kubrick, because I think people would get angry, but, he wanted to really try to bring it back to Stephen King's source material. So there is, it sort of like weaves this narrow line between the two. Somewhat successful, let's put it that way. Now, so the film, let me talk about the film, Dr. Sleep. After a good 15 minutes, or maybe even longer, I wasn't looking at my watch, but it felt 15, 20 minutes long, of whatever became of exposition that includes actors who look very similar to Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy Torrance in The Shining, and Danny Lloyd, who played Danny in The Shining, the 1980 film. The clock jumps ahead to 2011, where we find the now grown-up Dan Torrance, who's played by Ewan McGregor. Everybody knows who Ewan McGregor is. He's become a self-destructive alcoholic, like his father was before him, the Jack Nicholson character before him. Not Jack Nicholson, but the character that Jack Nicholson played, Jack Torrance. Now, he still has the shine, though, and he's still visited from time to time by the spirit of Overlook chef Dick Halloran, who now is played by Carl Lumbly, who is in A Cure for Wellness, because Scatman Carruthers has long passed away, and even if he was still alive, he'd be way too old to act. I don't know, he'd probably be in his 90s, I would think, if not more, probably more. So there's a new actor playing the character. And we won't say, I called him the Overlook Hotel chef. In Kubrick's film, he was called something very derogatory that, today we would, well, people do say that word, but I won't say that word because it's very, very derogatory. I'm amazed even for 1980 that they would use that word, but anyhow. Now, Danny, as I said, he's a self-destructive alcoholic. Now, he decides to move to a small town in New Hampshire to start afresh, and he's immediately taken under wing by Billy Freeman, who's played by Cliff Curtis. People would know him from The Meg and a few other films. He's a Kiwi. I think he's a Maori, in fact. He does a great American accent. Now, Billy himself is an ex-alcoholic. Now, thanks to Dan's ability to hear people's thoughts and to see into their past, Danny quickly lands a job at the town's hospice where he tends to the dying and earns the moniker Dr. Sleep. So that's where the name Dr. Sleep comes in. He basically has a way of talking to these people as they're dying to calm them down and accept that death is on their doorstep. Now, the film then jumps 8 years ahead, and Danny is telepathically contacted by a young girl, Abra Stone, who's played by Kylie Curran. This is only the second movie she's been in, so you probably wouldn't have seen the first one, because I don't think anybody saw the first one. But Abra has shine far more powerful than Dan's. Now, they don't call it shine, they call it magic in this film. Danny still calls it shine, but everybody else calls it magic. So Abra's magic, as it's called here, is noticed by Rose the Hat, who is played by Rebecca Ferguson, who seems to be in everything these days, Men in Black International, probably best known for Mission Impossible, a couple of the last Mission Impossible films. She was in The Greatest Showman. She was fabulous in The Greatest Showman, and quite a few other films. Now, she is Rose the Hat is a mysterious woman who leads a cult that feeds on the steam that is produced when someone who has shine dies. So when they're dying, this steam is let out of them, and these people, these cult people, they feed on that steam. Now, Rose and her gang, they make moves to get Abra's steam, and Danny decides that he needs to protect the preteen at all costs. So that's what the film's about. Now, I'll start by saying that I am not a huge fan of The Shining. Now, I know everybody loves The Shining. They all hated it back in 1980. Now they all love it. I was like, yeah, it's okay. You know, there are some scenes where Jack Nicholson was fabulous, particularly the scene in the bar where he's talking to, what's the guy's name? Larry, the bartender. Those scenes were wonderful. There were a couple other scenes where he was fabulous. But, you know, when he's doing the Kubrick stare and, there was a few other scenes, he was really wooden, horrible. I don't blame Jack for that. I blame Stanley Kubrick for that. And there was fabulous camera work involved. I think, definitely, and good sound design as well. I mean, there's scenes where you have little Danny pedaling his tricycle through the corridors, and by the way, that's repeated in this film too. And there, you listen to the soundscape, and you got the sound of the wheels on the wood, and then on the carpet, and the wood, and the carpet. It's very, very well done. So there's things about The Shining that I really like, but generally, I just thought, So I am not a groupie. Sorry. And honestly, I shake my head and wonder how Shelley Duvall actually had a Hollywood career, because she's horrible in this movie. She's absolutely horrible. And maybe it's legend, it's rumor that Kubrick terrorized her so much on the set that this is what he ended up with. Who knows? But she was really, really awful in The Shining. So bottom line is, not a huge fan of The Shining. And perhaps, maybe that's good that I'm not a huge fan, because I sort of enjoyed Dr. Sleep, whereas my colleagues who saw the film with me, who are big Shining fans, they didn't like this film so much. I think, maybe maybe the inclination is to compare the two, and if you're a Stanley Kubrick fan, you're a Shining fan, there's nothing compares. I don't know. I'm looking at Dr. Sleep as what it is, and I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. There are things I didn't like about it. I'll concede that the film's about 20 minutes too long. It spends far too much time reminding audiences who the original characters were, and I'd say, like many of Stephen King's stories, it takes some head-scratching leaps in logic. There was one point I turned to my friend, I went, how do we know that? I can't remember what it was, but I just remember turning to him going, how do we know that? And he, he looked at me, and it's like, no, there was no way that we could know that. And also with Stephen King's books, they have very lame endings, and this one also has a very, very weak weak ending, and the epilogue is like, oh, you didn't just say, the actor didn't just say what you heard him say or heard her say. It was really, really weak. And so, you know what, I that was disappointing, but generally I did like the film. Now, if you are a fan of The Shining, you will no doubt love all the nods and the winks that director Mike Flanagan has injected into this film. The set recreations are fabulous. The camera angles, there's sequences shot that by his go-to cinematographer Michael Fimoniari. There's a lot of things where you're going to go, like that. I think if you are a fan of The Shining, you are going to appreciate that. And you know what? There's so many of those in the film, you're going to miss a few. I know I missed a big one. It wasn't until afterwards the lights came up where my colleague said, "Did you notice X?" I'm not going to tell you what X is. "Did you notice X?" I'm going, "Oh, I completely missed it. Did you notice Y?" And they're like, "Oh, we missed that one too." So, there's so many things in there where he really pays huge homage to Kubrick's The Shining. Now, by far, the best thing about Dr. Sleep is Rebecca Ferguson. She makes the movie. She not only has all the film's best line, she puts a lot of energy into this film because, at times the film really does dip in terms of its intensity, and every time she's there, it just like ramps up again. She's got this great swagger to her. And she was great. She was really the best part of the film. I also like the young girl, Kylie Curran. As I said, this is only her second movie. She was really good too. So, in terms of the acting was quite good. Yeah, Ewan McGregor was okay. Nothing terrible, but he was okay. Cliff, the Kiwi guy, the Maori guy. What's his name? Cliff Curtis. He was good. So the acting was pretty good. It was a competently made film, but not a really exciting film. There's not a lot of tension. There's definitely I don't want to say there's no horror. There's very, very, very little horror in this film. It's mostly thriller, and I'd say, and it ebbs and flows. It wasn't really consistent. And I don't know, maybe that's more of a reflection of the source material than it is a misfire on the director's part. I've never read the book, Doctor Sleep, so I don't know how closely it was to the book. But in any case, King has indicated his support of this film, and which, as I said at the outset, he's never done for The Shining. He's never been, in the beginning he was very critical of The Shining. Now he's less critical of it because it's become so popular. But right away he came out and said how much he enjoyed this adaptation of his book. Now, in total, when I came out of the film thinking about the story, it's very similar to Star Wars, with Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, reprising his role. Little Kylie Curran plays Luke Skywalker. Rebecca Ferguson is Darth Vader. Now, I'm not saying that King ripped off George Lucas or vice versa. I'm just saying the stories of good versus evil and how some people are manipulated by the powers they are given are very similar. So this is like an earthbound version of Star Wars, really. That's what it is. Now, in case you haven't seen The Shining yet, don't bother seeing Doctor Sleep because there's so much of this film that is based on The Shining. You're gonna miss. I don't know that you're not gonna sit there and scratch your head, but you're gonna miss a lot of what this film really is. So I'd say, if you haven't seen The Shining yet and you do want to see Doctor Sleep, see The Shining first, and then it'll help you appreciate this film more. I don't know that Doctor Sleep will go down in cinematic history as the best film adaptation of a Stephen King novel, but it's not a bad one. It's okay. I liked it. So there you go. So that's Doctor Sleep. Open, as I said, all these films, they opened yesterday in Hong Kong. That's it for today. I can't remember what I'm doing next week. Over the next few weeks, there's a lot of films coming to Hong Kong, so I'm going to be busy watching more films. So check it out, or go to my website, howard4film.com, howard, F-O-R, film.com, and you can read my reviews, and I will get the review of Guilt by Design up there sometime today. Have a great weekend. See you.